My name's Carter Fanning. I'm the communications officer for the Libertarian Party of Bexar County. And today I've got Bob King with me. He is our Libertarian candidate running for U.S. House of Representatives District 21.
21, that's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So, Bob, if you don't mind, just tell me a little bit about yourself.
Oh, first, Carter, thanks for having me. Appreciate the support of the Bexar County Libertarians. I'm a retired guy. I'm 63 and never had an intention of being in politics. But my background is I have a master's degree in finance and went into banking and oil and gas finance as my first career.
Okay.
And I did that primarily in Houston and worked in that business until I was in my early to mid 40s and had a degree of success that allowed me to have some freedom to choose what I wanted to do next. And I wanted to serve others. And so I went into nonprofit service and leadership and did that pretty much until COVID.
Okay.
During that period, my wife and I built a house in New Braunfels, which we love. And once COVID came around, we said, well, what the heck are we doing in Houston? We have this house in New Braunfels. It's time to make maximum use of it. So that's a little bit about me.
Okay.
And my background. We've got two kids. They're 34 and 31. They live in Denver and Nashville. They're both married. And they're both concerned about the future, as I am. And they are in the process of deciding whether they're ever going to give us grandchildren.
Fair enough. I know my parents probably feel that exact same way.
Right.
So what brought you to libertarianism? Because, politics nowadays is, we hear so much from the left and the right.
Yeah.
We don't hear a lot of mainstream content about libertarians. So how did you become a libertarian?
Well, Carter, I like most people, lived in this two-party world most of my life and tended to be Republican, but with reservations about a lot of things. I think I was, there are some Republicans who really inspired me. I was a big Ronald Reagan fan myself. Not that he was perfect, but that he was a person who you could identify with and that you could, you could feel like he had the best interest of the country at heart. I did a small internship while I was in high school with a U.S. Congressman named Bill Archer, who at the time, a Republican who was who later became the chairman of Ways and Means. So he's a very powerful senior Republican. And another example of somebody who really, didn't do it for personal enrichment. He did it as service. And I think we have very little of that today. But I guess ideologically, my mother was the more political minded of my two parents. My father gave me football.
Okay.
My mother gave me politics, and she was a big Barry Goldwater fan.
Okay.
So you got to go way back. As I said, I'm 63. But Barry Goldwater ran for president in 1964 as a Republican. But as Republicans went in those days, I would say, retrospectively, very libertarian in his mindset. Like a lot of Western Republicans, he didn't want the party to mess with people's personal lives. That made him different from a lot of other Republicans.
Very much so.
And so I grew up admiring him and hoping for more Barry Goldwaters to emerge from the from the Republican Party, and unfortunately, not too many did. I think over time, as the country became more and more polarized, and politics became much more of a tug of war for power over this monumental Leviathan federal government, there really is less and less spirit of compromise, of finding solutions. And I think that solutions are needed. We can go into our corners. We could have a left corner, a right corner, and a libertarian corner. I suppose we could have a statist corner also, but nobody seems to want to claim that one. And just yell and scream for what we believe. But we're not going to accomplish anything unless we listen to one another and try to solve problems. And I don't think my opponents care to solve any problems. And so that's kind of why I have decided to run. As I say, got off the bench here to get involved in it. I would also say that as a general rule, I'm very, very concerned about the debt that we're leaving to my children's and grandchildren's generation and those to come. And so there's a couple of things that sort of moved me from being complaining old grumpy man, as my sons would say, old man yelling at clouds, and then to actually wanting to do something about it. The first is I did the math on the debt. So we know that we're about to hit $35 trillion in debt. It's accelerating, really. It's not slowing down. It's accelerating how fast we're adding debt. And I'm a finance guy, and so I'm familiar with big numbers. But 35 trillion is a number that's kind of hard to wrap your arms around, even if you're used to dealing with millions and even billions. Trillions is a lot of money. But that 35 trillion is just a small piece of the debt that we're leaving to younger generations. There are unfunded entitlement liabilities that we're generating at an even faster rate. And as current law stipulates, you add those the unfunded entitlement benefits that are currently in the law. If you add that to the debt, now you're up in the neighborhood of $120 trillion. Okay, and when you say $120 trillion, there's just nobody who can even fathom that. And actually, I think both parties benefit from the number being so big that nobody can even understand it. So what I did is I divided that number by the number of taxpayers there are in the United States to give you an idea of what the median debt burden is per taxpayer. And because that's a number that you can then relate to. And Carter, just so you know, your number today is $700,000. That's how big the debt is per taxpayer. Now, I would say that if a court were to slap a $700,000 judgment on every one of us tomorrow, I would doubt that there would be more than 0.5% of Americans who wouldn't be in bankruptcy the next morning. So it's a number that is beyond our ability to deal with. But yet, nobody's making an effort to do that. So that is what concerns me more than anything else. I think the two parties don't want to touch it. I think they are, there used to be a concept called the third rail of politics. I'm sure you've heard that, absolutely, which was messing with people's Social Security. Mm-hmm. Because, they would say, that's mine, don't tax me, don't cut it, don't, whatever. And anybody who tried to mess with it would, be like going down in the subway and grabbing the third rail, which is the electrified rail. But now I think that the entire budget is the third rail. According to these Republicans and Democrats, you don't hear either of them making any effort other than lip service, which I think is all the Republicans give us, is lip service about it. And so that's the first part of what drove me to make this decision. And the second part is I was doing what a lot of retired people do. I was looking at travel and leisure for where should I go on vacation. And I stumbled into an article on the 20 most affluent counties in the United States. And I thought, well, Nantucket, Biscayne Bay, Malibu, places like that. Well, 5 of the top 10 most affluent counties in the United States are suburbs of Washington, D.C. 4 of them are in Northern Virginia. 1 of them is in Maryland. And that should tell everybody what's going on here. If 5 of the top 10 most, and by the way, number 1 and number 2 are Northern Virginia, and then 3 more of the top 10. If you told me that 5 of the top 10 most affluent counties in America were suburbs of Silicon Valley, as a Texan, I wouldn't be real happy about that. But I'd at least say, well, they did something to earn that. They created something.
Yeah.
But what does Washington create? They sit around and create rules. There are 300,000 or 400,000 bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., and they sit around and they think of stuff that, in their, Princeton and Georgetown and Harvard and Yale wisdom, should govern the rest of the country. And, as money gets sent to Washington, they take their 20 or 30% clip out of it, and maybe 70% of it makes it back out to the hinterlands where we live. And meanwhile, they live above the rest of us. They lord over the rest of us. They have better salaries than the rest of us. They have better benefits than the rest of us. And it's just a time for us to say enough. So those two things, cause me to say, I have to do something about it. We're leaving our children and grandchildren with a horrible situation. And one more thing before I get off of this. And, we could talk about the effect that this debt has on inflation, on interest rates, and, it does. What we're suffering with right now, the fact that your cheeseburger now is like $9 instead of $4. And if it keeps going, another term of office under these characters, we'll be talking about a $15 or $20 Big Mac meal, and I just don't think people are ready for that. So yes, it has economic effect. I think it's killing the American dream for a lot of younger people. But even more fundamental than that, it's just a sin for one generation to take the money of future generations, and that's what it is. Yeah. We've got their credit card. We're charging it for all that it's worth. Mm-hmm. We didn't ask their permission, but we're doing it anyway because we can. Yeah. And so it's a sin. And I don't know why we're arguing about, whether theft is a sin. It's the 8th commandment. Thou shalt not steal. Yeah. And we're stealing. Yeah. And so we have to stop doing that if we want this country to have any kind of future.
Absolutely. So right now, when we look at national politics, there's been a lot of polling on what issues are the most important to Americans right now. The first one seems to be the economy, which you've touched on some, but I would like to talk about that here in a second. And the second one seems to be immigration, right, and the what's going on at the southern border right now. Let's go ahead and start off with the economy. I know you touched on it some, yeah, with the inflation and whatnot, but what is a libertarian solution to the economy? What would you do?
I am about solutions. I'm not just about lip service. If you go to my website, which is bobkingfortexas21.org, okay, you'll find a lot of very specific solutions. So 2 of them relate to the economy. One of them is that we should go through department by department and start getting rid of many of these 600,000 bureaucrats. Now, I know that politically we won't get rid of as many as we should, but I think what we should do after we trim as much as we can, reorganize as much as we can, the thing that needs to get added to the equation is dispersing the bureaucracy, what's left of them. So just as an example, the Energy Department does not need to be in Washington, D.C. In fact, it really ought to be in a part of the country like where we live. We could easily do with the Energy Department what corporations do every 5 or 10 years, which is contact a bunch of cities and say, what kind of deal can you cut us to move our headquarters? And we could ask Dallas, Houston, New Orleans, Tulsa, let's say, those 4 cities where there's a lot of oil and gas expertise. and say, what kind of deal can you cut us to move the energy department? In the process, a whole lot of bureaucrats who live in Washington, D.C. will not make that move because they got real estate in D.C. they're not going to want to sell. And we'll just say, fine, you've earned half of a pension, we'll give you half of a pension, and we'll be able to move forward with a much smaller headcount. And we could do that to every department. I would say the only three that really need to be in DC are state, defense, and justice. Those three, I wouldn't move. But everything else should be somewhere else. And if you moved the departments to every corner of the United States, first of all, the government would be more representative. Second of all, through the process of the move, we're going to shrink the government, I think, in half, something like that. And you just wouldn't have this class of people who live in DC lording over us, taking, a clip of every tax dollar and sticking it in their pocket, which is essentially what they're doing. And I don't see why at least 96 of the 100 senators are not in favor of this. I could see why Virginia and Maryland might not like this. Yeah. So that's one proposal that I have. And, when you have an annual deficit as large as we have, right in the most recently concluded fiscal year, the deficit was, I believe it was $1.7 trillion. That's 1 year. And I think we're well on the way to another year like that this year. And of course, Biden just came out and said, well, I want a new appropriation of $2 trillion. When you have that kind of deficit, you're not going to fix it by little whittling at the edges kind of things. We really need to take a chainsaw to the federal budget if we're going to save this country. So that's a proposal that I have. Another proposal that I have, and again, the details are in the website. Another proposal that I have is to change the tax code so that anyone who gives money to what would be human social service safety net charities would get not a deduction but a credit for that. And let's take the federal government out of the role of being the intermediator for charity. Now, I know I will run into trouble with some libertarians over this because they don't want any taxes over anything. I think as a Christian, I think we have an obligation to the least of our brothers. But I think the government is the worst intermediary because they're so inefficient, the decisions are so corrupt, and anyone who has the ability to pay a lot of taxes and would be given the choice of making a contribution to a nonprofit that serves largely the same purpose, in a minute would give the money to the nonprofit. And then that person who wants to continue to give the money to the government, then that'd be their choice. So to me, that's a libertarian approach to solving the social safety net issue, which is let's let the free market work. The free market would work because you would have, here's what happens when a government program fails. It fails, the bureaucrats say, well, it's because we don't have enough money, so give us more money. And that's the solution to a failed federal program. If a nonprofit fails, guess what? It goes out of business. Mm-hmm. People stop giving it money. That money goes somewhere else. So if you have a news media that is covering the nonprofits that are providing these type of services, there'll be all kinds of investigative journalism holding them accountable. I just think those nonprofits have to have accounting standards that are similar to what corporations public companies who have SEC filing requirements, which is something I did as a CFO, at penalty of going to prison. Mm-hmm. I had to truthfully divulge, disclose all the relevant information about our company so that investors could make a wise decision. That same thing could work with nonprofits. We just need to get the federal government out of it. And I think that would save a lot of money, a lot of money. So, you know, there's no one answer. Nothing should be sacred. The Defense Department should not be sacred. I think there's a lot of money wasted in the Defense Department. So when I think the economy, if the government gets out of the way, will take care of itself. I'm a big believer in Adam Smith's invisible hand, and that not that it should be unregulated. I do think there's a role for antitrust. I think government does have a role in keeping the business world competitive, but that's what antitrust rules are about. That for the last 50 years of my life, they basically haven't been enforced because of crony capitalism, because the politicians are so in bed with these corporations. So I think that the economy will take care of itself if the government will get out of the way. But the biggest problem is it's racking up so much debt that it's, you know, your generation is going to suffer, and then your children, my 32-year-old son isn't sure he wants to have children.
Yeah.
And I think that's a common thing.
It is surprisingly more and more common.
Yeah.
It's expensive enough to feed two mouths. You start adding mouths.
Right.
It is a concern for younger generations.
Well, and I don't know how do you take care of young children? The cost of daycare is so high, but that's really because the tax burden is high. We have inflation in everything because government has inflated it, because they're printing money and they're creating extra demand for things like for higher education, for medical. All those things are inflating way faster than other things where the government isn't pushing them.
Correct.
So, you know, I have a lot of ideas on the website, specific ones, but in general, I think we just have to get the government out of the way.
Perfect answer to me. The next thing, mentioned it before, is the border.
Right.
What would be your solution to what's going on at the border?
Well, you know, as opposed to the economy or the government spending, where I don't think any Republican could get to be more exercised about that than I am. Mm-hmm. I think that Republicans are using the border as a way to inflame their base, mm-hmm. to anger people, especially here in Texas. And it's really it's an election year tactic to maximize their turnout. And so I think what we saw in December, I think it was, the Republicans really had Biden in a corner on immigration. The national opinion is that, you know, that Biden has completely ignored border enforcement, and he has. Not that he's the only problem. The Congress is a big part of the problem because they've not simplified and expanded legal immigration. So there's plenty of fathers to this problem. But the Republicans just want to demagogue it. They don't want to fix it. I think the way to fix it, first of all, you have to have people in Congress who care about the solution and not about who gets the credit. So I had a football coach in high school named Oscar Cripps. He was a very famous Texas high school football coach. And he told us, preached to us over and over, it's amazing how much can be accomplished if no one cares who gets the credit. And it's such a true statement in life. And the problem that we have with Congress is the inverse. It's completely predictable that nothing will get accomplished when everyone cares who gets the credit. And that's what we have in Congress right now. And so even though the Republicans had Biden in a corner and could have gotten, I think, 2/3 to 3/4 of what they wanted, they wouldn't have gotten 100%, of course. So I'm not here to nitpick every part of that. But what I'm saying is they would have gotten a lot. We would have slowed down by a lot the the uncontrolled immigration that's coming across the border, bringing drugs, bringing human trafficking, all kinds of problems. And I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought here.
You're fine.
The Republicans would rather demagogue the issue than solve it. What we need to do, I think, and it's fairly simple, is, in a sense, it's the inverse of what Reagan agreed to in the 80s when we had a previous immigration problem. Reagan agreed to a deal where he would basically provide amnesty for some amount of what were then called illegal aliens, if Congress would promise to fix the border enforcement. And Congress said, oh, of course we promise. So Reagan, granted the amnesty, and then of course Congress didn't follow through and do their part of the job. I think we should do the opposite. I think what we could do is we could negotiate expanded limits for, green cards and, temporary worker visas, create a path to residency for people who really, not every immigrant wants to be a citizen. They just want to come over, work, bring money back, whatever. And that's all good. We need that. We certainly need the labor. And we have we need to solve the dreamer problem. And most of those dreamers have lived their whole life in the United States, and I don't want to kick them out. It would be heartless to do that. But what we need to do is say, here is the expanded package of legal immigration that we have approved, but we're putting it on the shelf. And it doesn't become active until we fix the border and tighten it up so that we know who's coming across and we don't have this completely uncontrolled thing. I think if we did that, we'd get both sides paddling in the same direction. And so, in short, we need more legal immigration, and we need border enforcement. So I'm a libertarian, but I'm a constitutional libertarian. I believe in the rule of law, and right now it's lawless.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked about the national deficit. We've talked about the economy. We've talked about immigration. Is there any other issues that are really important to you?
Well, I'm a big believer in the Bill of Rights. I think that we're constantly seeing one party or the other who's willing to infringe upon one amendment or the other. Depending on who it is speaking, the other side wants to limit their free speech. That's wrong. There's one side that wants to defang the Second Amendment. That's wrong. The Second Amendment is the underpinning that protects all the other rights that we have. But it goes all the way, 1 to 10. There's only a couple of them that are, true anachronisms that don't really exist anymore because these were, approved in 1789. But all the way up to the 10th Amendment, which says if we don't enumerate a specific right and give it to the federal government, then that power or right is retained by the state or the people. And we've completely blown through that and given everything to the federal government. And so one of the things that troubles me the most is just the state of discourse in the country right now and the fact that everyone's at each other's throats. And to me, we have to find an off-ramp to what I regard as an almost eventual impending civil war. Now, this civil war isn't going to look like Grant versus Lee. It's probably going to be more cities versus rural or whatever. And who knows what it'll look like. But we're getting close to it. And we ought to look for ways to reduce that. And there is a way that's already in the Constitution to, tone it down. And that is called federalism. If we didn't have to solve every single problem in Washington and find a one-size-fits-all solution, it's sort of like during COVID. Washington was trying to create rules that would apply to New York City and Marfa, Texas. In New York and Marfa, they don't need the same rules. And so federalism allows Texans to be Texans and Californians to be Californians. If they want to be different, that's fine. And just let people vote with their feet and be where they want to be. So I think we need some work, an amendment really, to strengthen the 10th Amendment. The case law has turned the 10th Amendment into such a, it's so subservient to the Commerce Clause, the Interstate Commerce Clause.
Agreed.
So they can say if you grow wheat in California, if you grow wheat and you sell wheat or whatever crop, and you don't have any kind of part of your business going across state lines, which was the point of interstate commerce, right? Mm-hmm. The courts will still say, well, the federal government can regulate you because your wheat is part of a global market of wheat, and so anything you do affects wheat in Nevada and Arizona and Illinois and whatever. And that's ridiculous. And we've gotten so far away from the original intent of the framers with respect to the states having the right to solve most of the problems. And I know we had a period in our country's history where some states behaved very badly with respect to civil rights. And of course, as a libertarian, I'm a big proponent of all civil rights and freedom for people, regardless of, race or gender or sexual orientation or anything. But the states should be the place where most of the rules are made. And if we went back to that, we wouldn't have two parties in Washington who are trying to cram mutually unacceptable solutions on each other. And it's that attempt to cram down on each other that's creating this sense that the country's being ripped apart. And really, I think federalism is the solution, but it's going to take a constitutional amendment for us to get there.
I think, unfortunately, you're right, but because the 10th Amendment in its text was the intent to do that, but it has just got stomped over with case law throughout the years, as you pointed out.
Yeah,
so.
Yep. One other thing that I think we need to remember this. The Republicans have their emotional hot button issue, which is the border. Mm-hmm. The Democrats have their emotional hot button issue, which is abortion. Mm-hmm. And they're going to play abortion for all it's worth in Texas. And they're doing that across the country because they think they have the upper hand on that issue, whereas the Republicans have the upper hand really on the immigration issue. And that's why that. But both of those issues are very easily solvable to the satisfaction of what I would say 70% of Americans. And they're not the hardest issues to solve. And they're in the way of solving the big issue, which is the debt.
Yeah.
And so, I think as it relates to abortion, the state of Texas is behaving abysmally, trying to regulate it out of existence entirely. I would say that, when the Supreme Court ruled in 1971 in Roe, they said there is a right to privacy in the Constitution. Now, in Dobbs last year, the new court said, nah, there is no right to privacy in the Constitution. I looked for it, I couldn't find it. And they may have been right from a contextual point of view, but for 50 years, our country behaved as though we had one. And I would say that the vast majority of Americans think we need one. We need a right to privacy. And the first thing I would do is I would propose one. That'd be the first thing I would do on day one. And my right to privacy amendment would say, number one, the government has no business getting involved in your romantic life, in your personal life, what you do in your bedroom or who you choose to love, the government has no business. And we should say that. Number two, I think the government has no business regulating pre-viability abortions. Okay, now you could make the argument that post-viability, that's a human life. And of course, we would all agree that the government does have the responsibility, really, of life, liberty, and property, protecting those things. And so each state can debate, I think, from viability forward to birth, when they can step in and do something. But they should have no place to regulate a woman's choice with her doctor to decide what to do. And here's the thing. If you did a pie chart of all the abortions that happen based on the gestational age of the fetus, it's like 99% of them happen before 20 weeks. So if the Democrats would just accept what I'm proposing, they would be protecting 99% of all abortions. But they don't want to do, just like the Republicans don't want the solution on the border, the Democrats do not want the solution on abortion. They want to preserve that last 1% because that's where all the emotion and, frankly, the campaign money is coming from. So I think if you used viability as the deciding line, and I think 50 states can reasonably make different decisions about what that viability is. It's not an exactly known thing. But and then there's a third thing that I think goes with the right to privacy that would be in my amendment, and that is that parents, not the government, get to make decisions for their families. So educational decisions, healthcare decisions, that is not the government's role. That is the parent's role. Now, I mean, of course, you need to have exceptions for child abuse and I'm talking about law-abiding parents making decisions about the health care, the education, and the disciplining of their children. And to me, those three things, sort of, the keeping the government out of your bedroom, keeping the government out of the regulation of pre-viability abortions, and keeping the government out of how you raise your family, those three things go together.
Yeah.
And I think I've never seen anybody propose these things. I will propose it, and I think 80% of the country would rally to this, and it would solve the problem.
Yeah.
But because the Democrats don't want to solve this problem, and the Republicans don't want to solve that border problem because it's too lucrative for them during an election year, that's allowing them both to just completely ignore the budget, and that's what's happening. That's the issue. That's the existential threat to our country.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. And when you look at the numbers, it's scary, to be quite honest. But Bob, is there anything else you want to add before we close?
I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today, and appreciate the support of the Bexar County Libertarian Party. My district covers 10 different counties. And it goes all the way out past Kerrville and past Fredericksburg, way out into the, almost to West Texas. But 40% or 42% of the voters in Texas 21 are in Bexar County. And so I'll be spending a lot of time here in creating a ground game in different parts of this district. It's northern Bexar County, and then dipping down, into Alamo Heights and a few other neighborhoods like that. But I love San Antonio, and have very much enjoyed making my home in this part of the state. So I look forward to meeting lots of libertarians and many San Antonioans. That's the right. Is that what you?
I'm not a local San Antonian. So
San Antonian, right? But it's a privilege to be able to be with you and to talk about things that I think are important and to hopefully advance solutions. Because if we don't have congressmen and women who are there, I'll just close with this. How about this? If we had 25 Bob Kings in Congress, and we had 12 and a half fewer Chip Roys, and 12 and a half fewer, pick your Democrat, I won't name names, but you can think of which one. If you had 25 people there who weren't beholden to Hakeem Jeffries or Mike Johnson or, the Democrat party bosses or the Republican Party bosses, they have to care who gets the credit. We wouldn't. It wouldn't take but 20 of us, 25 of us, to make all the difference in the world of how much can be accomplished. And like I say, it's amazing how much can be accomplished if no one cares who gets the credit. And I think if there's any one reason you should vote for me, it's because I don't care who gets the credit. I want solutions.
Excellent. I want to thank you for joining us today. If you've tuned into any of our interviews, we will be plugging all of these candidates on social media throughout the election cycle, and we will be making sure that you know when their events are, when they'll be in town, so that you can come out and see them speak.
And one last plug.
Yes, go ahead.
BobKingForTexas21.org.
BobKingForTexas21.org, and we'll make sure that there is a link to that in this video. Bob, thank you so much for.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
Absolutely.